the moment of truth. And I'm sure you having done
Is
this
it,
as well,
is it
Jake,
working?
right? Is it working?
It's live, but then from when you click live on Restream to when you go live on LinkedIn from that notification, there it is. I just saw it. It's like
Yeah. Okay.
15, 20 seconds.
Yep. I saw it as well. Okay. No, that it always makes you feel better. You having done
Is
this
it,
as well,
is it
it
working?
always makes you feel better now that we're live. And so, Jake, as I had mentioned before, the first couple of minutes, we kind of let everyone get in. I go through some general community announcements, and my favorite community announcement is the part where we get to embarrass Vlad. So, Jake, I'm sure you've seen Vlad's YouTube channel, Solus PLC.
100%.
They have cracked 22,000 subscribers. And Vlad won't ask people to subscribe to his own YouTube channel. Yes. And so this is the point where I come out and shill for Solus PLC and ask people to subscribe to Solus PLC because we need a silver play button right there in the top left corner of the screen over Vlad's shoulder.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it.
Doing what we can, Vlad, doing what we can. But no, so we have a really good show set up today. We're all very excited. You guys might recognize Jake. You may be wondering, where is this caricature that I know as the Manufacturing Millennial, but we will absolutely get into that. If you guys would like to catch up on the previous shows, please go ahead and find us at manufacturinghub.live, and we will go ahead and drop in the comments all of the places that you can find us in general. Vlad, do you have any other thoughts before we jump in?
I do not, Dave. Let's get started.
Awesome. Everyone, welcome to episode 24 of Manufacturing Hub with me, Dave, and this guy over here, Vlad. We have a very special guest today, Jake Hall, who you may or may not know as the Manufacturing Millennial. We have him in the flesh if you're watching this on video. And honestly, it's a little strange to see that you're a real person, Jake.
Yeah, right. It's
Yes,
not my character, caricature on the side. Well, I mean, it's pretty close. It's pretty close.
It is, but you just look so much more lifelike now in person. So welcome to the show, Jake. We're very happy to have you.
Oh man, it's great to be on, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, Jake. Definitely, a pleasure to have someone who's got so much influence in the manufacturing space. I'm sure that many viewers will recognize the face, the caricature, and everything that you stand for. Today, we wanted to talk about careers in manufacturing, but first and foremost, I want to get to know you as a person, right? So not the business manager. I want to get to know, how did you get into manufacturing? What path did you take? Was it a traditional path? Did you go to university? And I already have some of those answers, but I want our viewers to get to know you as well. So I'm curious, how did you get started in manufacturing?
Yeah, so I would say, one of my biggest influences in manufacturing right away was Lego. The idea of following instructions, building something, and then tearing it down and using your own design. It's that engineering thought process of what it was. And then from Science Olympiad to First Robotics, those early stages of introduction around robotics and engineering and programming really what inspired me to go into manufacturing. So graduated high school, I went to Grand Valley State University. I got my bachelor's in manufacturing engineering and minor in biomedical engineering. And from there, it just kind of took off, where within West Michigan, I would say you're kind of going to have to move into the manufacturing space. West Michigan has the highest density of industrial robots per capita anywhere else in the US. And a lot of that's supplied because we're a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supplier for the automotive industry across the state. So the manufacturing really was the next step to engineering. Graduating with that degree is we're in the automation manufacturing space.
No, that sounds great. I'm curious about the studies, right? So you pursued a manufacturing oriented engineering degree, and the reason why I'm curious is because, taking this back to myself a little bit, I didn't know what a PLC was, or what automation was, or what manufacturing was while I went through my engineering degree. So I'm curious, what kind of maybe courses you had, or how was manufacturing integrated into that engineering degree?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the time, there was only 4 or 5 different degrees. I knew I wasn't going to do CE or EE or anything like that. So it was definitely on the mechanical side of things. So
Hmm.
my decision really was between mechanical engineering and manufacturing. Now, the manufacturing degree, the program itself was called Product Design and Manufacturing, was the degree that was behind it. Now, the ABET accredited
Mhm.
Hmm.
degree is manufacturing. But for me, the reason why I chose that as a course was because there was a lot of product development courses within it. There was a lot of design work. And then on top of that, there was also a lot of electives that followed this program that was PLC programming. It was robotics courses. It was Six Sigma lean manufacturing processes. And that, those 4 or 5 electives, which kind of separated the mechanical engineering degree from the product design. And I could be saying it's completely different now because this was 8 years ago. But those programs really excited me more for the degree I wanted to go. And the one thing about Grand Valley that was unique, and they were kind of one of the first universities that did it, and more universities are following, was it required co-op. So I was required during my 4 years of engineering school, I had to take 3 separate semesters of assigned a co-op with a manufacturing or automation company. And this was actually you earned credits for it. It was built into the program. So during that time, I worked for a automation machine builder. For the 2.5 years that those 3 semesters spaced out in. And that really gave me a lot of experience because it was a heavy robotics PLC and an automation company, and being able to get your hands on with a lot of custom automation equipment that goes into the manufacturing process was, a dream to have before even graduating.
Did the university help you with getting those placements, or was it
100%.
up to you?
Yep. So
Oh,
it's,
that's
yeah, the
awesome.
program is set up where they reach out to all the different companies in West Michigan and the Grand Rapids area. It wasn't just West Michigan either. I had a couple buddies who did it at Tesla. I had a couple guys who did it at NASA. So it was one of those programs, but the School of Engineering itself partners with and certifies the program to make sure that it's meeting the demand and training that they want to have when their students graduate. And a big proponent of that is, does that company have the ability to hire that student once they graduate? Because the interesting thing about the graduation rate is, it was something like right around 99.7% of graduates finishing their senior year have jobs lined up before they graduated.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
that
That's awesome.
and that other percentage was kids who were going into the master's program, or continued education. So the fact that the School of Engineering aligned it up where I'm going to have phenomenal experience of real world experience before even graduating, and then the option to continue with that company after you graduate, is just, it sets up for that first 1 to 2 years of a lot of learning, hitting real world um experience in a way. And let's face it, once you graduate, I know we're going to talk more about this, Vlad and Dave, and I hope we're not going to have too short of a conversation here because I could go on for a long time. The degree is only valuable to a certain extent.
Hmm.
And I have a great story where one of my coworkers and we were heading down to a very large electric car company in the US on Monday. And we were talking about his story where he's a senior controls engineer, but he never went to college. He went and he got his basic journeyman's electrician degree or certification. He worked under a master electrician. Then under the master electrician, he went and started working for the panel shop. And then from the panel shop, he became a junior controls engineer. And now he's a senior controls engineer, running the press upgrade group at FZ.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things where here you have us working side by side. I took the engineering route. He took the skilled trades route. And the skilled trades, I would say, doesn't limit you by any means in terms of future opportunity. And I don't want to steer a conversation away, but that's the one thing that I found most exciting was, yeah, this is the degree, this is the process that I took, but by no means is it the correct or the only process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's somewhat of a controversial topic in certain circles, whether you should go for an engineering degree or you should go into like a trade school. There's also, the question of ABET accredited universities, as you had mentioned, and then some companies look at, the technical engineer, or what is a technical associate degree, which
Yep.
is going to be a lot more practical and less, I would say, theoretical. And
Yes.
companies, for whatever reason, again, I never fully understood why, but they would not choose people who don't have an ABET accredited university. And again, I mean, like, my opinion is that some of the smartest people in, I would say, in technical fields come with no formal
Yep.
education, which is really interesting, right? But at the same time, when it comes to these fields where you want to get some hands-on experience, I feel it's very difficult. And I know it's changing, there's different platforms, there's different ways to like simulate your code, whatever, but it's hard to get that hands-on experience without having, let's say, a Fanuc robot in a lab, or a PLC that's connected to a bunch of these devices. And it's just very expensive, right, if you want to do it on your own. So there's always, I would say, like, arguments for either one. But I would say it depends on your personality, right? Like, if you can persevere and actually learn, because the fact of the
Yes.
matter is, it's difficult. Just like anything else worthwhile doing, it's going to be like a difficult experience. There's a high learning curve, I would say. And so if you can get through that, then more power to you. But I would say, like, the traditional schools certainly provide at least the hardware and the space to, and I think you wouldn't be responsible if you accidentally smashed that robot,
Yeah.
into a wall or something. There's a little bit of a less of a risk, I would say.
Yeah. And it goes back to, I think more and more um manufacturers and companies are not necessarily valuing the engineering degree as what it once was. I think it's one of those things where it's a clean pass, in a sense where, oh, it's a check mark, so that means they must be valid in a certain sense. But at the same time, I went through engineering school, and some of the people that I went through with is like, there's no way, and that's nothing, and that's nothing against the program that they graduated from. But I think it goes back to that experience of, I know where we're at, we can't hire enough controls engineers. And the last thing that we care about is where you went to school. What we care about is, what is your experience in the market right now, and where do you want to go? I mean, do you want to be a senior levels guy? Are you a gold certified ignition guy? Are you Siemens? Are you Allen Bradley? Are you a robot? What's your vision? I mean, there's all these different stuff. The last thing I care about is, where did you go to school? Because going to school doesn't mean you're going to help me when I need to send you down for a commissioning project.
Yeah. And as you know, as I mentioned, based on my experience, a lot of colleges don't have manufacturing specific classes, so it's hard to get them, even if you did go to university. So either way, you would have to upskill someone if they just came out of university with even an electrical engineering degree, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the value that I think we're seeing more within skilled trades and 2-year associate's degrees, is there's more mechatronics programs happening up in 2-year community colleges than there is within universities. And I just say that from experience here in West Michigan. I know Grand Rapids Community College, they have a mechatronics program where they teach you Fanuc programming, Allen Bradley PLCs, how to create engineering drawings, basic pneumatics. And Lansing Community College, 35 minutes, 45 minutes east of me, they have like 14 or 16 Fanuc robots in their lab. I mean, so it's just a whole nother world of opportunity, where in West Michigan, I'm saying I'm a little bit different because we are the manufacturing hub kind of in the area. But for other places, I think your best shot is a skilled trade school that has a mechatronics program, because those are a lot more common than a lot of sense, as you said, manufacturing focused engineering degrees at universities.
no, completely agreed. Dave, what do you think of the two different paths one can take?
No, absolutely. And so Jake, I appreciate I appreciate kind of your perspective. It's, different than many people you talk to. A lot of people who, reach a senior controls level engineer or above, at least that I seem to run into, have an engineering degree. And I think especially in the last probably 10, 12 years, it's changed a lot. There's been a lot more of a push back to trade schools. There's been a lot more push into co-ops. When most of my friends are going to get their engineering degrees, I'm not sure I know a single one that I graduated high school with. who has an engineering degree that like a co-op was even on the table.
Yeah.
I know some places that, there was a 5th-year co-op, and you go in thinking, why would I ever want that? Why would I spend an extra year in school? And you don't realize how valuable it is. So I think that that's very valuable. And I think especially in the last 10 years or so, and especially in manufacturing heavy areas, it's one of those, it doesn't particularly matter that you live through 4 years of college and you can do differential equations, and you can live through a series of semesters with really hard math and physics classes, because most of the time you're going to come out and there's going to be very little applicable knowledge to the, this is a PLC, this is a screwdriver, good luck,
Yeah.
sort of machine down situation.
Yeah.
So I think that's very interesting. I would hope that we see more people continue to go into trade schools, 2 years. I think that it's a very good path for most people to get some good technical hands-on knowledge. And worst case scenario, they come out, they get a good paying job, and a few years later, they decide they want to go back to college, and they go finish their college degree and potentially look to pivot into something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole thing. I think for some people, an engineering degree is the right choice, especially if you like the idea of theoretics and design and all that stuff, which is it's continued schooling and education versus a person who goes, like you mentioned, just to a local community college with a mechatronics degree. Sometimes that's all they need. And then they're also not graduating with $45,000 to $60,000 in student debt. It's
absolutely.
And there's a lot of manufacturers and companies now who are also developing their own co-op and training programs. I mean, that's one thing that we have here is we have a co-op training program where we take journeymen and we bring them to controls engineers. And we have a full process to do that. And the fact is that we have that program because that's exactly what happened. We had a guy who was a journeyman's electrician, became a master, who then went in the engineering side. And now he's more in the management. And he said, hey, we need to create this program because we can't find enough controls engineers. So we have
Jake,
to
that's through the university or the company you're working for?
That's where I work. That's
Gotcha.
where I work. So we can't find enough controls engineers. So we're training our own. And I think that's what enough manufacturers are going to do as well. Is, hey, if you can't find the resources, you need to be a part of the problem and a part of the solution to the problem and fix it.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I think we're going to see a lot more of, I would say, manufacturers getting involved earlier, right? Because right now, let's say your current interview process in a traditional sense is just a half an hour to, let's say, a couple of hours worth of a conversation before you determine if someone's fit or not, versus I'd say the benefit of engaging them, 2 years in college or 2 years at a trade school. You get to know that person, you get to see how they work, you get to participate in their upskill. So I think like there's a lot more of a relationship at that point. You know what I mean? You can not only help them where they want to go, but you can make sure that the skills are aligned much better, right? Like, again, because I graduated, again, not knowing what manufacturing was, and I really wish there was maybe someone who could kind of point me in the right direction. I think that's where the industry is going to go for sure.
The other thing I think is worthwhile bringing up is neither of those as a means of getting into the industry. It's the amount of resources that are available. And Vlad, I'm going to use your YouTube channel, and I'm going to use Tim Wilborn's YouTube channel as well. And you guys know Tim too. Is the fact that more resources are available because of social media, because of these websites like YouTube and other open resources, that a lot of people can teach themselves how to program stuff leading up to it. We were talking about IRA with, PLC Next, how you have the super low cost introductory PLC that people can learn from. And there's a lot of lower cost solutions out there where, Allen Bradley is the 5,000 pound gorilla and here in the US in the manufacturing industry. But that doesn't mean the fact that you can't learn the basics off of a much more economical learning solution as a person who's teaching themselves growing up. I think that's one thing as well, as we are seeing more and more independently taught people how to program PLCs, how to do robotics. And the great thing about that as well is we think of we were talking before, Dave and Vlad, about, hey, we can't crash a $25,000 robot because, hey, that's not on us. Then that's part of the program that we're invested in. But the great thing about this now is more companies are offering simulation-based program where I can now program a 6-axis robot pretty much 95% of the way there, virtually on a simulation process. And granted, we're still growing, but I mean, 5-10 years ago, that was not existent. So in 5 or 10 years, I would put $100 in a can of, a pack of beer on it right now. Then 5 years, I can put on a Microsoft HoloLens and augmented reality and walk around a virtual robot space at my home and program it with a virtual it's going to happen, and that's
it's going to happen for sure.
Moving. And I think that's just it's making manufacturing more open source, and I think that's what we need to do as manufacturers. And I'm going off a little bit of a tangent, is you're not going to grow in manufacturing unless you begin opening your doors to new technologies and new solutions and working with other manufacturers.
No, for sure. And as you said, like, it's becoming easier and easier, right? Like, another example I want to throw in the mix is Ignition, right? So Ignition, you can get an entirely full free license for up to 2 hours that you can reset indefinitely, right? So I think there's absolutely no excuse for someone who's in automation to not have at least installed Ignition and played around with the training, that they provide. So it's completely accessible. And I think, and I hope, and I've been having those conversations or trying to start those conversations with companies like Rockwell, but I really hope that they provide some kind of an environment where students that cannot, shell out thousands of dollars for their official training, go and simulate the PLC, write some logic. Obviously, for non-commercial purposes, they're just trying to get into the field. And I think it's going to open up more and more as the companies notice these other ones doing so.
It's the business principle, right? When you think of 3D CAD, SolidWorks is a big one, PTC is a big one, and then Autodesk Fusion is a big one. Well, what Autodesk did years ago is they partnered with First Robotics, US First, and they gave them free licenses for every high school student to learn that program. And you can go online right now and download a software where if you do under $100,000 a year in commercial value, you can have this software for free. Talk about, I can be not familiar at all, but I can now go on YouTube and watch thousands of hours of tutorials and teach myself how to be a 3D modeler for equipment. And I think the more companies follow that process, the more they're going to be successful long-term. Why do we think Fanuc, for example, is literally donating hundreds of LR-mate robots, the yellow robot I have on the shelf behind me, to universities and colleges, because they say, hey, they have that experience. When they get to a manufacturer, a small to medium-sized manufacturer that's introducing their first robot, who are they going to pick? Well, obviously the one they used in college, because that's what they're familiar with. And that's what more manufacturers are going to be. Well, that's what more product manufacturers are going to need to do, is introduce more free demo-based products and stuff for people to learn from. Because let's face it, the Fortune 500 companies that are out there, the Fortune 1000, the Fortune 2000 companies, they're already automating. They already have PLCs. They already have controls engineers, but they're a very small portion of American manufacturing. The larger portion of American manufacturing, when you look at like 70% of US manufacturers or higher don't even have a robot or PLC, that's the giant market that's out there. So how can companies begin to breach that market? I think that's by a lot lower cost resources that are a lot more expensive. Where a small to medium-sized manufacturer, they want to be able to afford a systems group like where I work to come in and do that, but they could have a much more, person who's starting out from community college support their needs 100%.
Yeah, no, I like that initiative from Fanuc, right? Like, they're probably losing a few dollars by donating those robots to universities, but ultimately they're upskilling engineers. And as you said, once they hit the floor on the manufacturing side, there's going to be one platform that they're familiar with and that they know very well. And the chances are, through the chain of command, they will recommend that solution because they do have that knowledge. And again, I really think that some of these OEMs change their approach, and I wouldn't say like copy that same model, but take maybe a spin or figure out how to engage students a lot more. Because again, it's very difficult, I would say, as a starting point to pay for some of those classes as a student. And as you said, with the loans that you're already incurring, it's always a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think we could continue to go down this path for like 7 or 8 more hours, Jake. But I feel like I need to ask kind of the burning question that I imagine much of the people watching us and everyone listening is wondering is, so how did you go from your career path of, you knew you wanted to be in manufacturing, so you got your engineering degree, spent some time working for a machine builder. How did you go from that to becoming the manufacturing millennial and being that caricature we all know?
Yeah. So from graduating college to up to about a year ago, I worked for an industrial distributor selling PLCs, photoelectric sensors, robotics, the kind of world of automation. And I attended a variety of conferences and trade shows. And throughout this process, I said, wow, there's a huge underrepresentation of the younger generation when you look at the grand scheme of things of millennials and Gen Zs not in manufacturing. And there's a huge disproportion of 45, 50 plus compared to 25 and 30 and under. So I said, well, I'm a millennial. I love manufacturing. I'm just going to come up with this name, and it fit. And basically from a couple of things where I just watched people doing the same thing and how they created a personal brand, not even necessarily in manufacturing, but in the YouTube space. Because the influencer personal brand has been out there for a long time, years. I mean, Instagram people and YouTube people making tens of millions of dollars a year becoming influencers. But in the manufacturing space, it was very minimal. There's a few out there, like you guys have been doing this a lot longer than I have. But I can count on a couple hands manufacturing influencers. And so the idea of my personal brand developing as a character of something that's different, because everyone on LinkedIn has this, fancy tie suit background with the, tilted 45 degrees, getting that picture on LinkedIn. I said, that's not me. I'm a millennial. I'm outspoken. I'm super passionate. I'm super outgoing. What's recognizable? Well, I'm going to make a character that's a little bit different because that's fun. I'm going to wear my blue Cubs baseball cap because everyone recognizes the Cubs logo. And when everyone sees a Cubs baseball game or another hat, they're going to think of me. So it's the idea of that personal branding, which has kind of grown the idea of the manufacturing millennial. But really my goal setting forth, and really when I said I'm going to kick off March, April of 2020, when I really started the manufacturing millennial, was I'm going to drive more awareness to manufacturing and automation via social media. I'm going to drive more awareness to the younger generations as manufacturing being a fantastic career choice and a promising career choice that's going to allow you to grow and succeed for the rest of your career. And then the third point was I'm going to drive new technology and automation to manufacturers to be more competitive, as I think someone mentioned here about reshoring back to America, driving automation. But at the same time, technology creates awareness and attraction to your workspace. And millennials and Gen Zs are not going to come and work for a manufacturer that is using equipment from 35, 40 years ago, because their cell phone's not even 2 years old until they get a new one. And so that was kind of the premise of this is my focus. This is what I'm going to stay on. And it's going to be about manufacturing and automation. That's just what I'm going to talk about. That's what I'm going to share. Because there's other people, social people on LinkedIn, that they just kind of share anything underneath the sun around technology. And that's just not me. I want to be a very focused person. So when people think Jake Hall, they think manufacturing millennial, that's what it's about. And from there, it's grown, amazingly. I'm 21. I haven't even checked it a couple of days. You know, 21, close to 22,000 followers. So, you know, gaining 15,000 followers in the last 8 months. You know, I think I already started back in March of 2020. I had 400 connections on LinkedIn. So a year and a half, you know, over 20,000 new followers. And it's just been a really authentic, exciting process of putting content out there. And if people like that content, they can follow me. And from then it's just grown, working with other manufacturers, you know, talking about market accessibility and how they can do a better job leveraging new content without, you know, I would say doing the video data sheet, because so many manufacturers these days and companies, it feels like you're just watching a data sheet talking about a product where you're not engaging. There's nothing exciting about that. And you're not addressing the industry problem. And that was a big thing as well, is companies and manufacturers, and like what you do, Vlad, and what you do, Dave, is we talk about the problem industry and the industry, not the product. Now, the product can be a solution to the problem, but what needs to be addressed is the problem that a lot of manufacturers are facing right now. And part of that's just, you know, the skill gap. Part of that's the labor shortage. Part of that's the overall investment in high automation right away as a high cost, as a first, you know, it's a large risk. So driving those questions is kind of just how my brand has been developed, bringing awareness to manufacturing and into automation.
I smile because you've nailed so many things, you know, that I've seen in manufacturing, right on the head. But no, it's for sure. I think there's many challenges, but with that, you have many opportunities, right? Like, I think that manufacturers, again, are realizing how they need to adapt to the younger generations. We do constantly get hit, I would say, with the PowerPoint decks where I'm genuinely excited sometimes about a product that they're going to demo, and I sign up to this webinar, and someone just shows me the slide deck, and here's the feature number one, here's the feature number two. But yeah, like, there's definitely a lot of, I think, opportunities to be seen, and I really hope that they take your recommendations seriously, because I think we can certainly change for the better. But I do want to ask you, on the branding side, because I think a lot of engineers, technicians, people who have landed their first job, maybe still trying to get into the field, are watching this. And the question that always comes back is, how do you, or I guess, like, what are your thoughts on how they can build themselves on, let's say, social media in general, but more precisely on LinkedIn? What would you, let's say, if you're looking to hire a young controls engineer that's going to either work on PLC projects, that could be SCADA, ignition, whatever, what would you be looking at when you go to their profile? What kind of things can they do to grab your attention, perhaps?
Yeah, well, it's a couple things. I think I'll kick it off with saying people buy from people, they don't buy from companies.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you're doing on your personal LinkedIn profile, it should be about you and what you're doing and what you're growing, and how you can begin to form and leverage yourself as a subject matter expert. And in a sense of, share what you're passionate about and show what you do on a daily basis is something that you're actually familiar with and you have an understanding of. I think a lot of times people out there, they create a resume and they just say, hey, I got 5 years of experience. That's great. But what did you do? What were you involved with? What are you doing to make sure that you are staying on top of what new technology is out there, what standards are out there? And just the basic, I would say, if I were to give 3 pointers on LinkedIn to say, here's how you can become more successful and prime yourself for your next job: be active on LinkedIn and interact with new content and videos on companies that you're working with. Connect with people that are in the same industry that you are, that you could see as a potential customer or a potential company that you could work for. And then the third one is create your own thoughts and engagement. I'm not saying you need to go out there and produce content and video like what we do on a daily and a weekly basis, but going out there and finding an article from the Robot Report or from the International Federation of Robotics or from A3, and going out there saying, hey, here's this news report, here's my thoughts on it. What are you? And you're engaging conversation. That's where people are going to say, this person's creating value to the industry beyond of just doing it as a job. And I think that's just going to give you a leg up. And especially in areas where, going back to, you don't have that quote unquote engineering degree. But if you're one of those people who says, hey, I'm a subject matter expert, you want to talk about what is happening in the world of autonomous mobile robots and AMRs and all the acquisitions that have been happening, the fact that Zebra paid like $100 million for Fetch, a few months ago for this astronomical amount. That's where conversations and where you as a value can lie to a manufacturer end user, because you're staying on top of what's happening in the industry.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with those points. And if I may add like one extra item to that, and again, this is just my thought, but I think engineers are inherently interested in learning things. So I particularly like, I know that a couple of people post this, but when they build a panel, right, like they have their layout and they've selected certain devices, I like to see how people are doing things differently, because ultimately in our space there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, so to speak.
Yep.
And so I always, have like questions for people like, well, why was this like selected like that? Because it gives, I think, engineers an opportunity to learn from each other and understand why things were done in a certain way, because there's always a reason, right? It's not always obvious from a simple picture, but it gives you an opportunity to learn, I think. So anything that's kind of thought and learning provoking, it's like pulls me in, at least.
It generates discussion.
Yes.
And it generates the ability to continue to learn. I think as an engineer or someone who goes into manufacturing kind of has that mindset of continuous learning, is something that I think fits a lot of us as a personality.
Yeah, and there's different ways. I think like Dave has experimented quite a bit with posting polls. So I think like it depends on, as you said, who you are and what you're comfortable with as well, right? Not everyone's going to pick up a camera and sound, I would say, like polished tomorrow. But what's important is find your own, I'd say, medium, and just work through it, right? Like, because even for you, it was, I'm assuming, a journey. It took a lot of effort to figure out what works, what makes sense, and decide on where to go.
Absolutely.
No, I would agree with all of those things. And just kind of to both of your points, I would say that building a brand, or building your influence on LinkedIn, it's not an overnight thing. There are many people that I'm sure we've all seen that they'll come out hard, they'll post 10 things a day, for 3 months. And then 5 years later, you're like, don't I remember I saw this person a few years ago, and they're just gone. So it's, your career and your brand, as we're talking to now, they're all the long game. It's the find ways to do a lot of this sustainably. And I know Jake puts out great videos. I think it's just about every day or every day.
Yep.
And I remember you talking through the process of building those videos, and that's something that you've obviously got knocked down to be able to put out regularly. And that was honestly part of the reason why Vlad and I came to put together this stream turned into podcast, was so that we could find a way to sustainably, have really good, interesting conversations with groups of people, many of whom, maybe the 50,000 people watching, or the few thousand people watching, would not have been able to know and wouldn't know from. And so for us, it's the find a way to do it sustainably over the long term.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to discuss, Jake, a little bit on your current role. So
Okay.
I know we talked about how you got into manufacturing, but what are you doing now? Can you give us a better idea? I think we talked a little bit that you're looking for certain individuals in the automation space, but what are you like responsible for? What are you excited for? What are you doing?
Yeah. So I work for a company called Zelstra. Within that group, there's a systems integrator group where we have locations in Michigan and the Carolinas and Tennessee and Ohio. As a business development manager, my main focus is on generating opportunity with new companies that we've never done work before. And that could be everything from modernization of old PLCs that we're modernizing to new ones that are not 25 years old anymore, to preventative maintenance, condition monitoring, to really doing a full transformation of a factory floor. Everything from taking their 45, 50 machines that aren't connected anymore and then bringing them up to a SCADA system and having them all communicate together and go to the cloud. So really what I have is I am the person that initially generates that conversation. And then once that conversation is generated and once an opportunity is identified, then we bring in the team of CSMs and senior controls engineers and application engineers who follow behind me, and we'll put together proposals and scopes. But for us as a company, we focus on really two different groups. We have our small to medium-sized manufacturers, which we support locally here. And then we have a selection of about a dozen national accounts that we work at, everything ranging from SCJ to PepsiCo to JBS, some of the billion-dollar, 50 plus locations in the US type companies, and help with them. We really team with them on creating an automation roadmap. So we'll go in there, we'll do full floor assessments, factory assessments, everything from IT, OT to the network to the infrastructure. And we'll have a team go out there and be on site for 2 weeks, designing a full roadmap of saying, hey, this is what your next 36 months looks like to hit that digital transformation. So it's some really exciting stuff that we're facing. But then again, it's one of those things where I cannot find enough senior controls engineers. I can't find enough panel builders. I can't find enough technicians. I can't find enough people who know Fanuc and ABB robot programming, or Siemens or Allen Bradley, or Beckhoff right now is a huge one right now. That's, you're having a hard time finding people with Beckhoff experience. And then of course, the idea of Kepware, Wonderware, Ignition, MES platforms, the whole 9 yards of automation, everything from the sensor all the way up to some people still use the idea of the Purdue model, level 1 to level 5, all the way there, even though kind of IIoT kind of changed that whole process of I could take any device and bring it up to a high level right away.
So if you're listening right now and you've got those skills that Jake mentioned, you know where to send your resume.
Yeah.
That's interesting for sure. And I think the shortage is being felt all over North America, at least. I'm not very well versed in the European markets, but I would assume it's in a similar situation for sure. Yeah. And I want to talk about, from that perspective in like career development, how do you look for people? Do you post on your website? Do you use recruiters? Do you reach out yourself? Again, because I think a lot of people are trying to figure out what's the best way, again, to put their foot forward and find those positions.
Yes, and yes.
Okay.
So it's really a bit of everything. There's recruiters out there. We have our website. We have our own HR. I think what they call them is like people's team. I'm not for sure. There's a bunch of fancy nerds. Anyways, It's a group of people who work at FZ who just their job is to find people. And then of course a lot of it's just connections on LinkedIn too. I just had a person message me on Monday about an opportunity. We got his resume and he had his first interview yesterday. So things move fast in the industry just because of the demand that's out there. But yeah, really every space that's out there, we have people constantly searching Indeed and there's another one out there, Factory Fix, which is another company that I've talked with before, where they're kind of doing their own unique search on and opportunities that way to find new people and for hopefully attract people who are looking to come to their website and apply. So
interesting. I haven't heard of that website. I'll post a link, and if anyone's interested in checking that out.
Yeah, but it's a community of guys here on LinkedIn as well that started up that company, Factory Fix. Okay. But yeah, it's really the spread of stuff, because it's one of those things where you gotta hit a little bit of everything to make it work. It's not one thing that's gonna bring in the people and the man that you need. It's a little bit of everything.
No, that makes sense. We got a couple of comments that we somewhat missed that I want to read out. So Tony mentioned, and this was an earlier comment, so I apologize for missing this. He said, there's one thing I love about the controls engineering route. Usually employers are flexible with education versus experience. They're usually a lot stricter with mechanical or electrical engineering roles, which is strange because controls engineering is a accumulation of electrical, mechanical, and even some computer engineering. And I think that's a very interesting point too, right? Like even in the roles that you've mentioned, you typically want someone who not only knows how to program a certain piece of hardware, but understands the components and also has at least some, I would say, like mechanical or manufacturing exposure to be able to understand the process, right? And I think that's a conversation that doesn't happen very frequently, but the truth is there is a learning curve to understanding the process side of things. It's not enough to, again, I think we talked a lot about understanding, let's say, ignition, and I think that's the key to the door. But your learning doesn't stop there, because once you're on the manufacturing floor, in order to implement some of those projects, you need to understand the process to a certain degree. Obviously, you're not an expert in in it from day one, but there is a learning curve. So that is a very good comment. And then Dan also said, David just described me. I haven't been able to post in a while. So Dan, you probably know him on LinkedIn as well. He was fairly active for a while, and then kind of, I guess, got really busy. I think he took a role from being a professor at a university, and now he's working back in manufacturing and in an operational role, if I'm not mistaken. But it's an interesting, like how careers pivot as well. So one day you could be doing one thing, and then, like you went through an interesting transition where you're doing a lot more marketing, I would assume, and outreach to these companies versus a very traditional like technical role where you're more focused on implementation. And to that point, I wanted to ask you what as you grow from, let's say, an engineer to a senior controls engineer, and then we can also talk about management level, but I'm curious, what would you want to see in that transition, right? And I think the standard answer is, I want to see 3 to 5 years of experience, but I think that's really not enough. Like, what would you look in a person that's ready for that senior controls engineering role versus just being a controls engineer?
Diversity in your knowledge. I would say, 3 to 5 years of experience on Allen Bradley is fantastic. But if you can say, I have Allen Bradley, some Siemens, and some Beckhoff, I think that qualifies you more, because you're not just a one part solution. You're a much more valuable individual that can bring experience on multiple fronts. And maybe it's not just PLCs, it's PLCs and robots or ignition, adding that to your level. I think creating diversity in your skill set is what really brings you from a level 1 to a senior guy.
What about like on the human side? Would you have any expectation of that person leading or like taking charge of more junior engineers, and like, understanding how well they fit like in a team more so than, I mean, obviously than a junior engineer, but do you have those expectation of those of senior controls engineers?
It really varies,
Okay.
and varies from person to person. There's some senior level guys that work for us that are not great personal people, but I can put them on something and say, read through this and tell me what it means. They can do that fantastically. And I have a question I need to have around batch mixing for food processing. Fantastic. Can he lead a group of people? Absolutely not. But he is definitely a senior level guy who can answer those questions. And I have some senior level guys senior controls engineers who aren't as experienced, but they're really good at navigating the process of a customer. And it really varies of, I hate this idea of, gatekeeping, where you have to have a checklist to become a title, because at the end of the day, in my opinion, I think a title is a title. I could throw whatever I want behind my name, and it's not going to change what I can do for a company, and it's not going to change what a controls engineer. And granted, things are different at different manufacturers and companies. We're 600 employees. Go work for a company that's 25,000, 50,000, like a Ford. Yeah, a level 1, 2, 3 is different. But at the same day, if you're level 3 and you're not performing, a level 1's going to outshine you. So at the end of the day, it's one of those things. Titles are great, but titles are not your definition of what you can bring to the company. Because at the end of the day, your work is, as a controls engineer, your work is what shows. If you're on a project and you're tasked to program something, you're tasked to design an ignition screen for a company, and you can't do it, I don't care what title you have, you can't do it. And that's one thing too. So I mean, at the end of the day, for a lot of people here, don't get caught up in titles. Show your diversity and knowledge, and I think that brings a lot more to the industry.
No, I think that's a good point. You know, I think it's just easier to silo some of those positions and kind of, I would say, even in my perspective, to look forward to something and be able to like aspire, like, hey, well, I want to grow in that specific role, and like, what do I need to make it happen? Just to have that maybe mental checklist and understanding of where one wants to go, right? Because I think it's not as transparent as one would hope, and again, like, for good reasons, I would say, but at the same time, I think it's good to give people some clarity of what the expectations might be, so that they know how to align themselves and work towards something like that, right?
Absolutely.
Dave, what are your thoughts on that?
I think those are all good points, and I appreciate Jake mentioning how some people are better at some items than others. I would make the point that going from a junior to senior controls engineer is probably less about your ability to lead a team than going from a senior controls engineer to a manager, or you have, operational control of this facility or this shift. And so I would say junior and senior is typically more about skills and knowledge, and then kind of the step above that, unless you're going deep into an SME route, is going to be more about your people skills, and that all depends. There are lots of people who are very good individual technical contributors who absolutely do not want to lead groups of people, and the worst thing a company can do is to try to force really good technical people into a manager role, and then everyone fails, and then you lose the really good technical person because they're like, I don't want to do this. I wanted to be the technical person, you want me to be the manager. I'm going to go take a technical role somewhere else, and then we're back to square -3. But no. And so Jake, I've got kind of the inverse question of
Yeah.
that. So towards the beginning, we talked a lot about needing more people in manufacturing. And so I recently drove through parts of Michigan and Indiana and was shocked by the number of billboards I saw. And I was honestly shocked that, some of the manufacturing jobs that have billboards up are paying $24 an hour and a $5,000 signing bonus. And I'm thinking to myself, man, if I was 18 years old, my life might have been very different. But how do we go about motivating the next generation of people to think manufacturing is maybe cool, maybe sexy, maybe something other than what dad and granddad did growing up and smelled bad and were greasy when they came home? How do we go about motivating them?
I think it's a couple things. One, it's disposing the myth that manufacturing is this dirty, dark, dangerous environment that only dumb people work at. And that's not the case anymore. Manufacturing is one of the most innovative industries that are out there, that are driving the latest and greatest in technologies and automation, and new stuff. I mean, the fact that you're looking at companies like Boston Dynamics, which is a robotics company, but they're designing equipment now to work in the automation, distribution, and manufacturing space because that's the demand. What we need to do to drive this ideology away that, sorry, I thought I had my phone silenced. What we need to do to drive away this myth, or this idea that manufacturing is this attractive industry, is begin to implement new technology. And why are people still writing instructions and work down on paper instead of using digital tools? Like, on my phone, I can follow my work instructions this way. Why are we doing manual processes of stacking boxes on pallets when we could automate that process? You're not going to attract the next generation of workforce when they can go and work for other manufacturer or other industries out there that are more high tech than what we're currently at. The Gen Z and the manufacturing, the Gen Z and the millennial mindset is based around technology, around instant access to information, and around really working within our fingertips and working smart. If you're a manufacturing company who isn't using those resources and leveraging the new technology, you're simply just not going to attract that generation. Why do you think so many people want to go work for SpaceX and Tesla? It's not because everyone wants to go work 70 hours a week. It's for the fact that they can get that experience working on bleeding edge technology and bleeding edge manufacturing. And I think more manufacturers and companies need to follow suit and saying, how do I make my company more attractive and create it where the people who are coming to work for my company feel a purpose of what they're doing. People go work for SpaceX because they have the purpose of the one goal of designing a system that eventually will land on Mars. That's SpaceX's goal. They want to inhabit Mars. And anyone who comes to work for that company is driving that purpose that way. The way for SpaceX, people go to work for Tesla. People go to work for Tesla because they want to create leading edge high-end electric vehicles.
Yep.
That's why they do that. So why do other manufacturing companies not leverage that same mindset of millennials and Gen Z want purpose in their daily jobs? It's not just about a paycheck. And how do you change that mindset? And I think the more people who begin to leverage robotics and autonomous mobile robots and AGVs and AI and a world of industry 4.0 solutions, that's going to make them more attractive, and that's going to make people want to become part of manufacturing.
I like that. I think that's really a very big part of why people don't see manufacturing as an attractive industry. And I think, one thing I'll add to that is that I would say the action of changing should be genuine, from the sense that you could tell someone at an interview, that we're definitely looking to change. We're trying to implement these solutions. You're going to be the one who's going to drive that change. And once the engineer comes onto the manufacturing floor and has all these great ideas, like you said, sometimes some of these manufacturers have equipment from 30 years old, right? So someone could write a great plan. Here's where we're going to go. In 2 years, we're going to change this and that. And ultimately, a lot of times they either get shut down or not heard, I feel like, well enough. And that's where they lose that interest, right? Because they were genuinely interested in working with those new technologies, and they were sold on that idea. And the reality was, again, because I can only speak to that because I've seen it happen and I've seen colleagues speak to that, they were essentially not allowed to make the changes that they were initially brought on or told to be brought on to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so this is a great conversation. We'll have to find some more time to potentially bring Jake back to continue the conversation. Jake, as we're wrapping up, we're going to ask you the same questions we ask everyone else. And I like to say this is our unsponsored Audible segment, because as I'm sure you know, Jake, everyone absolutely loves to read and listen to books. I think you said yourself you are a big audiobook person. And so this is the point in time where we ask for your recommendation, and Vlad's going to go on his phone and buy the audiobook.
There you go. I'll give two books. Mm-hmm. Jim Collins' Good to Great, and Never Split the Difference is the other one. Those are two books where and that's by Chris Voss.
Chris Voss, yeah, that's right.
Both great books.
Yep. So those are my two recommendations, and I'll go back and I'll listen to Never Split the Difference once a year.
It's a really good book. It's a really good. I think like it's a mindset more than anything else. Mm-hmm. Really good book. I'd recommend it as well.
But negotiating process, especially if you want to be that level one guy and make your way up in a company, that's a book that's going to help get you there.
Absolutely. No, that is a very good book. And so my other question for you, Jake, is I think we talked in your role at FC, if you are a controls engineer of any sort, looking for a new position, they should reach out. And I would imagine if you are a company who currently does not work with FC, who wants to have a conversation with Jake about doing some work, they should reach out. Who should reach out to you for the Manufacturing Millennial?
Say for the really anyone who has a passion for automation or manufacturing. I love to connect with you. I love for you guys to follow. I love just to continue to share the exciting things that are happening in the industry. If there are companies out there that want to drive market accessibility and work with quote unquote an influencer like myself, reach out to me and let's drive ways that we can bring market accessibility and market awareness to the problems that you guys are, solving in the industry. And reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Jake. Vlad, any last comments before I wrap us up?
No, thank you, Jake. Really appreciate it. It's great to follow your journey, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more of it on LinkedIn.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Jake. Everyone, thank you for listening. This has been episode 24 of the Manufacturing Hub with me, Dave, and this guy over here, Vlad. Please feel free to give us a 5-star review if you guys listen to podcasts, because we're semi-professional podcasters and are supposed to make the ask now. We'll see you guys next week, August 18th, for the next live show, and whenever we drop on the podcast apps.
Thank you, everyone.